Watch me ride.
Hi everybody. First thing, for my normal subscribers, please do understand, as I've mentioned previously, the things that are going on my back. I can't make riding videos at the moment so much, so I am doing a video which I've been asked to do for years because I've always done photography and people want to know what I use and how I do it and the top tips for photography, as it were. Now, to give my background, I've been doing photography since I was about 15, I'm now 32. I started out with 35mm film cameras, completely manual. Then I moved on to 35mm automatics. Then I got into digital photography, and for about 10 years I was doing wildlife photography semi-professionally. Just meaning basically that I took wildlife pictures and I managed to sell them to people. So that's kind of my background. Okay, so the obvious thing to talk about first is camera, the actual camera body. As you can see, this is a Canon 1D Mark IIN, which is an old digital camera. This cost me £2,000, and that was when this was discontinued old. When it was new, it was more like, what, 4 possibly? It's only 8 million pixels, but it is one of the most beautifully designed cameras that I've ever used. But it's a little bit outdated. Even though 8 megapixels isn't a lot, it's plenty for most uses. I don't use this camera so much these days because, whoa, because I later bought, because I wanted to do some film work, a Canon 600D. This is already, at this point of this video, this is an outdated camera. And I bought this because, as I say, I wanted to do some film work, and then I started using it for stills, and was far happier with the results from this camera than I was from this one. This is a great camera. Yes, that can do 8.5 frames a second, whereas this can only do 3.5, and this has got like 9 autofocus points or something. I don't know for definite, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. And this has got like 45 autofocus points. I'll get to what those are, but more is better, generally, in cameras. So basically, because cameras have got so good these days, so this is a 600D, which is old already, you don't really need this end of cameras to take decent pictures. Yes, they're nice to have. Yes, they do things that these cameras can't do. Yes, they have better image sensors and more pixels and all that stuff. But if you just want to, you're just an everyday person taking pictures, you don't need to spend all this money. You can do it with simple stuff. As I say, all my pictures are taken with a 600D, a 350D, or that old Mark II 1D Mark IIN. Sorry, I'm on a lot of painkillers. And I think learning the skills to make the most of a cheap camera is better for your development than having an amazing camera which makes it easier. It's not always easier, it's sometimes harder with these sorts of things, but whatever. But there's 2 things you need to consider when it comes into picking a camera body. Brand. Most people with digital SLRs these days are Canon, Nikon, and more recently Sony have come into the ring. Your choice who you go with, look into each individual camera and what strengths and weaknesses it has, and you pick what you want. But when you pick a camera body, you're pretty much saying that is who I'm going to buy lenses off of from now on, because all these lenses, which are interchangeable obviously because it's a digital SLR, only fit with this type. So the Canon ones only fit the Canon ones, the Nikon ones only fit the Nikon ones, the Sony ones only fit the Sony ones. There may be a crossover with some of them, like Olympus might fit with one of them, I'm not sure. But the point is, the main brands, when you pick your body, that's who you're going to be getting lenses from. So it's important to not just look at the price of the body of the camera, but look at the cost of the lenses and the availability of third-party lenses particularly, because that's where you can save a lot of money down the road. Yeah, you spend £2,000 on a body, but then you spend, I think this was nearly £1,000 for this lens, and this one was about 400. This one was so by this point you've always spent as much on lenses as you have cameras, so it's important to consider that. And these are non-Canon lenses. Had they been Canon lenses, the prices would have been double. The other thing to consider is crop factor. You might hear about full frame cameras and crop sensor cameras. Basically all this means, it's overly complicated, is if it's got a small sensor, it only uses a small part of the image that the lens gives it. A full frame camera will take a larger part, and it's because the sensor is bigger in a full frame. If you literally imagine a circle of light and you get the big rectangle as big as it can possibly get in that circle, that it's still got straight edges, that is your full frame. If you then crop it down by about, in this case of the Canons, I think it's 1.6 times, you're actually getting slightly smaller. So what it means is, and this I'll have to go on to because it comes into lenses. Lenses zoom is done in millimeters. Your eye is about 50 millimeters. If you put a 50 millimeter lens on a full frame camera like this one, and you hold up it to your eye like this and you look at this eye, it looks the same. It's the same as the way your eye is. It's same magnification. If you take the same lens and the same settings and put it onto a 1.6 crop camera with a, the smaller sensor, you're going to get about 80 millimeters, I think it is, because basically you times, all you do to work it out is you just go your millimeter length times it by the crop factor, and that gives you the answer as to how many millimeters you're actually getting. So if you buy a fixed 50 millimeter lens, it will be 50 mil on a full frame, but it won't be 50 mil on a crop sensor. So if you want a 50 mil, you might want to get something like a 35, because it will put you closer to 50 if you're using a crop sensor. But basically, pick what you can afford. It is worth investing a bit extra in the beginning, to get decent equipment. Get multiple batteries, really important because it's so stressful not having many batteries. On the one other thing I'd say is that I should explain, this camera actually isn't this size. The 650D is actually this size. It's very diddy, and that's very good about it. You can chuck it in a bag and it doesn't take up much space, but because I've got big hands and because I want more battery life, you can buy these battery grips off of Amazon, and basically it takes a drawer with 2 of the standard batteries or an adapter to run it off the mains, or even AA battery door that comes with it, battery drawer, should I say, and you just slide this in here, it screws together on the tripod screw and it tightens down. It reproduces the tripod screw there, so you're not losing out there, but what it does give you is the same controls basically you have here on the side. So shutter button, your wheel, and there is, oh no, that's it. I thought, I've got another one of these grips that's got an extra button on there, but this has just got the 2. If you buy that from, oh no, it's got some on the back, sorry, being stupid here. If you buy this from Canon, you're paying a lot of money. You buy this from Amazon, they're about 20 quid. And this one is a perfect fit. The finish on it's nice. I've already done a video talking about this grip. I'll link some of my photography videos in the description if you're interested. But the battery grips really do add on to the little cheaper cameras and make them feel a lot larger and a lot nicer to use. You're more stable. In the same way that with these, the higher end ones, they naturally come with buttons here and buttons here. So you can use it landscape or portrait and not be trying to do this stuff, because you can't hold it still when you're like this. Okay, so the next thing is lenses. These are the 6 lenses I use. These are the 5 lenses that I use. I have a Sigma 50 to 500mm zoom lens, which I used for wildlife because you need a good amount of zoom. 500mm is quite a lot, but it's not as much as you think it is. So that's a Sigma 50 to 500, 1.4 to 1.6. APO, DG, HSM. I'll quickly explain what that means. 50 to 500mm is the minimum zoom range to maximum zoom range. 1.4 to 6.3 is the aperture. We're going to get onto that. APO, I believe that is a type of covered metal covered optics, isn't it? Or maybe that's the DG part, I'm not sure. HSM stands for hypersonic motor. This lens is not hypersonic motor, and when it focuses it goes. It's noisy and it's slow. The ones with hypersonic motors, basically you just hear of the actual thing moving around. You don't hear the motor itself. The next lens is a Sigma 105 fixed focal length, which means you can't zoom, it's just as it is, and this is a macro lens. This lens is how you get super close to insects, for instance, fill the entire frame. This is a fantastic lens. I am massively impressed. The reason I use Sigma lenses is because, and particularly out of the DG range, is they're just really good. And they're not that expensive. If you want to get Canon equivalent, yeah, they may be slightly better in a few places, but they're like 3 times as expensive. So, depending on your work, that's the macro lens that I use. This is a kit lens. Now, kit lenses are the lenses you get when you buy the camera. They're normally made of plastic rather than metal. They rattle a bit, and people say they're the worst thing that's ever happened. Actually, I love them. I think they're great lenses because they're cheap, and you can, you don't care about them so much, but also you can get good pictures with them, and it's very rewarding to get good pictures with what people would automatically assume was a piece of rubbish. So much so that I have a 28 to 80mm which actually comes off of a Canon EOS 50E, which is a film SLR, which is my old film SLR, but it works perfectly with my digital stuff. That's another thing, you can come and buy old film stuff. Some of it still works with the digitals. And the other one I've got is an 18-55, which is the standard kit lens that comes with like the 600D. This has got image stabilising in it, or it's got stabilising. Basically, it moves the element inside the lens that helps keep it still, gets rid of the shake. It works very well and quite nicely for video. That's one of the reasons this has got a stabilised lens. And then you have a switch on there, there's autofocus, manual focus, the same with all of these will have an autofocus, manual focus switch, unless they're a fully manual lens. And the last lens I have is a Canon 50mm. This is an actual Canon. These are super cheap, but basically these allow you to get super short depth of field. So if you think of a picture where something in the foreground is in focus, and then everything else is out of focus, even though it's really close, this is the sort of lens you want. A lot of people like using these for vlogging and stuff, because rather than you seeing all of this behind me, you'd see blur, well, me and then just blur, so I'd stand out more. So they're the lenses I have, and they cover everything I need them to do. On the focal range, I can say, well, like millimetre zoom from wide to zoomed, so remembering that 50 is about normal, anything below that is wide angle, anything above that is magnified. It starts with, well, that one starts at 18mm, but actually on this it isn't 18, it's more like, it's probably closer to 20 something because of the crop factor. But if I used it on this camera body, then it would be a true 18mm. And obviously everything sort of crosses each other in the middle here with the 18 to 55, 28 to 80, and then 50 to 500. Obviously there is an advantage of a crop sensor with a 500mm lens, which is actually more than 500mm of zoom. So you get more zoom factor by using one of these. That's one of the reasons a crop sensor can be a benefit rather than a disadvantage. So now I'll explain what I do with each lens, and that might help you understand what lenses you will need. My number one tip is get the kit lens, okay, because it is made to be the best, or well, not best, but it's meant to be generally all the areas that you normally need. 18mm is pretty wide, even though it's cropped up, so you can take landscapes, and then you've got 55, which gives you enough zoom to, and it's obviously a bit more than 55, gives you enough to crop portraits and just get a bit close without having to walk forward. So as an all-round, you know, if I'm just wandering around taking pictures, I can use that for pretty much everything, unless there are specialist things I want to do, like get super close to an insect or get close pictures of an animal I can't get close to myself. So as I say, kit lenses, they're really good. Your next lens is completely dependent on what you're interested in doing. As I say, if you want to do wildlife stuff, if you want to do sports stuff, something where it's a little bit further away and you want to be able to crop it neater, motorcycle photography, a lot of people think about it, my subscribers would probably be most interested in stuff like that, maybe. Something that gets up to at least 300mm is a good idea. If you can get above that, it just makes things a little bit easier. They're not cheap, but they're worth having. So if you want to do wildlife, sports, stuff like that, get a big zoom lens like this with a nice range on it. This being 50 to 500 is amazing. I don't know of any other lenses that have that sort of range. So if you're on a budget, something like that really does cover a lot of grounds for you. Be aware though that with something that's zoomed, you need extra light because it loses a lot of light through that. If you got a more expensive lens, it would keep more light, you would get faster shutter speeds and crisper pictures. But as long as you've got enough light there, which generally, depending on what the body makes a difference, we'll get onto that as I get into the settings of the basics. This video is going to be long. You can gain some of that back using ISOs, but we'll get into that. So then if you want to take pictures of insects, pictures of flowers, pictures of things that are very small and you'd like to really focus on those and not the stuff behind, then a macro lens is a good thing. As I said, this 105mm by Sigma is fantastic. You can almost fill the frame with a 5p. I do a lot of insect photography and I have found it to be a wonderful lens. If you want to get into the super close stuff, there is, I think it's called the Canon MP65, I might be wrong. It is a super zooming macro lens that allows you to get really close. But one of the things you should be aware of with this is that the focusing on this is very slow. So you wouldn't be able to use this as a sports photography thing. Like for instance with this, the autofocus is very fast, it whips backwards and forwards. If if you have it in the mode that it basically tracks what you're focusing on, again I will get into this, that's nice and quick. This is very slow, so you wouldn't use this for any other reason than bring a really set up shot. You also need a lot of light, so you might want to invest in a flash, and that's something we'll also get onto. But yeah, for super close-up stuff, macro lenses is where you want to go. And then for general photography, but you want to give it a real sort of, you know, that nice soft focus behind things and play with depth of field. Something like this 50mm Canon, it's known as the Nifty 50, but this is actually the second one. There's Mark 1, Mark 2. The Mark 2 is better than the Mark 1. I think I paid £80 for this new, and because it's got a low aperture of 1.8, you get that really nice short depth of field. Don't worry if you don't understand these terms, later in this video I will be explaining them. And for the final bit on lenses, filters. Filters are glass discs that you screw on in front of your camera lens. When you buy a new camera lens, buy a sunlight filter or a UV filter. It's just basically just glass. It'll take a few bits of the light out, but get them because that's what's going to protect your actual camera lens. If you notice, all of these, you probably can't see from this distance, but they've all got filters on. So if I smash it into something and I smash this front one, I just unscrew it. It's been on there a while. I can unscrew that and then replace that, and you don't scratch the actual lens. It also means when you're cleaning it out in the field, you know, you're using a t-shirt or something because you've got smudge on it and you can't get your lens cloth out and be all careful about it. Scratch those up to hell and buy a new one because they're like 15 quid. The other options with filters, you can get coloured filters and stuff. I've not really played with colour filters in photography. I like to try and keep things as natural as possible and not accentuate, but try and capture the colours and the light and the beauty that I see in the world in a photograph. You see pictures, like people say the picture doesn't do it justice. It's because you can never recreate that feel, but hunting to recreate that feel is something that I try and do. Anyway, back to filters. You can also get things called ND filters, which are neutral density, which is basically if it's very bright and you've got a lens which is wanting to take it at like 4,000ths of a second and it's still overexposing, you can bring that down. You can also, if it's sunset or something, you can bring down the light that's there but still capture. It's a bit complicated, but it just dims everything a little bit. It gives you a bit more range with shutter speeds and stuff like that. And then you get polarising filters, which I love using because they turn sunsets, you get the very true colours. It turns the blues deeper blues, it turns the orange deeper oranges, and basically what it's actually doing. It's also good for taking reflections off water, taking pictures through glass, taking pictures of cars, bikes. It's because basically light is either horizontal or vertical waveform, and this will take out one of those, horizontal or vertical, depending on how it's rotated. You literally can look through it and you rotate the thing and you look at, say for instance, the sea, and you're like, oh, it's glaring, spin it, and you watch the light just disappear and you can see the sea perfectly. And the same thing they use in fishermen's glasses, so they can see through the reflections of the water and see the fish underneath. As I say, if you get a lens, get a sunlight filter for it. Just do it. Trust me, you'll thank me later for that. And maybe a polarising filter is a good call. But beyond that, play. Experiment. That's one of the big things about photography. It's all about experimentation and trying stuff. And when I first started photography and I was doing film, you really couldn't do the try this, take the picture, have a look what it looked like, or okay, we'll try different. You did that, then took the picture, then 2 weeks later you saw it. Digital has brought around a revolution in photography, I think, not just because the cameras are now cheaper and they're much better, it's also because it's made it a lot easier to learn. You can learn by your mistakes, and that's why I think photography really took off. At the point that I was doing it semi-professionally, and that's when the market just kind of collapsed because there's so many people taking good pictures because the equipment is getting better and better. But as I say, even for me, even though I own a professional level camera, professional level, it's now very old, and the battery doesn't work on it anymore, I've got to get a new one, so I would like to use that again. I'm just using an old budget entry level, and people are surprised how good my pictures are. I'm not saying they are good, I'm just saying people say they're good, so. But I know a good picture from a bad one, and I don't take bad ones. So now I'm going to talk about some of the more technical side of photography, as in like what settings you want for what they mean, but it's going to be not really overly complicated. This is where some of the stuff in the beginning you didn't understand will now start making sense. And don't worry, I will explain this in a very simple way to understand. Okay, so on this camera, for instance, and many other cameras, you will find a jog wheel, a menu wheel. It's basically just a wheel that you select your modes. There are multiple modes on this camera, and I'm only going to tell you about 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of them. Okay, so number one, to knock it out of the way because it's not relevant to most of the rest of this, is the video symbol. That is where you put it if you want to use video. Digital SLRs take fantastic video. This camera makes brilliant looking video, but it hasn't got autofocus while it's recording, and it has a habit of turning itself off. So this isn't really, I wouldn't advise getting this for video work. It's very stressful to use for video work. But I want to get that one out of the way. Okay, so then we're going to start with A+. That's basically automatic, but it's doing more help for you. It's adjusting lots of different settings. That makes this a point and shoot camera. You know, you can go out, take a picture, and it will expose it correctly for you. There's P, which is basically a standardised automatic function. It's just taking guessing an aperture and an exposure from the focal length and what light's available to take the best picture. And then comes the 3 settings, which I am always in. And to be honest with you, I'm in one of them more than anything else. So you have M, which is manual, which means I can choose my ISO, my aperture, and my shutter speeds, and everything. I will get into what those mean in a minute. Then you have AV, which is aperture priority, which basically means the one thing that you can change with your wheel on here is aperture. It will work out the shutter speed that you need depending on what aperture you give it, and it will tell you if it's underexposed or overexposed by a little bar meter in the bottom, which goes, you know, 0 in the middle, and it's like -2, +2. That is under and overexposure. And then there's TV, which is shutter priority, which basically means you tell it what shutter speed you want, and it will make the camera do its best shot at giving you that shutter speed. If it's good lighting conditions, not a problem. It might mean it overexposes, but in that case it will probably turn the aperture up to try and bring the overall light down. Don't worry, it will make more sense in a minute. But I use mine 99% of the time in AV, aperture priority, because the aperture is the thing that makes a real difference. The ISO I set as low as I can. I'll get to what that means again in a minute. And I like to use it in aperture priority because then I can choose the lighting level to put with the aperture. And I always tend to take pictures 1 or 2 stops underexposed, because when it comes to editing, I want to also shoot in RAW, which, well, I haven't really written that into this, so let's explain what RAW is very quickly. RAW and JPEG. JPEG is a picture taken as it's taken, and you cannot, that's just, it is it. It's the recorded data. Okay? RAW takes basically it's like a range of underexposed to overexposed images, information, like what's on the sensor, and then when you're in a post-production editing software, you can bring back more, so for instance you've got shadows and you want to bring back some of the detail from those shadows, you can bring that back and not lose any quality. If you did that with a JPEG, you would end up seeing some artifacts and stuff because it hasn't got the extra data there. So shoot in RAW all the time. It will save you, because when you get to your editing software, it will just make things a ton easier. If you're not going to edit them, it might be better to use JPEG, but what I'd advise in that case is to do a mode that takes a JPEG and a RAW file at the same time. So back to where I was. So yeah, a couple of stops under is always good, because then you can bring those back. If it's overexposed, you cannot bring that down. You just can't. I use manual most when I'm doing stuff with flash, because it's a very quantifiable amount of light. I can choose how much light I have. So if I'm using my studio lights to do product photography, or if I'm using my flash to do inset photography, I will be using it in manual, because also you have a thing called the rolling shutter effect, which is if you take a picture more than 200th of a second, with this camera anyway, with a flash, you end up with a bar in the middle of the image, because it's the flash is faster than that bar is, because it goes up and down, and it's so short that you're not actually getting, the flash is so short, you're not getting light for the remainder of the rolling up. That is a bit complicated, but just remember, that's why I use manual, because it gives me full control. So as I've been mentioning, all these different names, aperture speed, shutter speed, ISO, all this sort of stuff, what do those actually mean? Well, let's start with ISO. ISO is basically how sensitive the camera is to light. If it's very dark, then you're going to want to have a higher ISO. But know that with that comes more noise, basic granulation in the picture. The better your camera is, and when they claim that a camera is really good at night photography, it's normally because it's got a very high ISO with no noise. On this camera, this can go from 50 ISO, which is a lowered ISO, because it normally starts at 100, and 50 just takes the most amazing images when I'm using flash and stuff, which is why I love this camera. And this goes up to 8,000 or something, but anything over 200 ISO on this and you're getting grain. It's not good. On this, the newer one, 400 ISO without too much grain, it's good, it still works well, I'm happy to use that. 800 ISO, pushing it a bit. Sometimes I'll do night photography and I'm pushing the ISOs a little bit harder, but I try to do longer exposures rather than higher ISO. So in some cases I'm actually using 100 ISO to try and keep the clarity but do a very long exposure. So as I say, ISO affects sensitivity, so an easy way to understand that is, say it was 100 ISO and the camera says that it needs a 50th of a second to take that image at a correct exposure. If you put the ISO up so it's more sensitive, it may say that it only needs a 200th of a second. So obviously the sensitivity speeds up your shutter times because it's more sensitive. How long it can be like for. Okay, so the next one is shutter speed. Shutter speed is literally just how long the shutter is open for, so how long the sensor is exposed to light for. A fast shutter speed will hold the detail more. So for instance, say you had a car flying past you on a rally course and you want to get a really crisp picture of the car with the gravel coming off but you can see everything nice and crisply. You want a fast shutter speed, so you might want to up your ISO a bit depending what the lighting conditions are like. And I'll get to, that's the technical side, I'll get to that in a minute. But you want a fast shutter speed to do that, so say 0.002 of a second. Now say you wanted to get more of a blurred image of that coming around the corner, you might want to drop that down. So you're only taking it at say 0.05 of a second, and you'll get a small part of it will probably be in focus, the one that's moving the least, and you get all the blur going around it and all the dust coming up, for instance. And then the lower end of that is taking like long exposure time lapses where you see like the cars moving, like the lights tracking. That you're doing a much longer exposure, I mean up to 30 seconds a minute. And then into astrophotography, when you're taking pictures of the sky, stars, that's where these cameras have become amazing because you can put the ISOs up high enough now that with a minute or two's exposure you can get amazing pictures of what the sky really looks like because it's picking up the little lights that you can't pick up immediately, build up over time on the sensor and show. So shutter speed's quite simple, I think that's probably something that most people get. Now, then you have aperture and depth of field. So a simple way to understand apertures and remember which way the numbers go is that if it's a high aperture number, it means the hole's very small and it's going to need more time to take that picture because it's not getting as much light. Now what that will give you is everything near and far will be in focus. Depending on the lens and everything, it gives you a much wider depth of field. So say for instance these lenses are lined up with a wide depth of field, I could take a picture of this one and these would still be in focus and the focus would gradually fall away. If I chose a low aperture number, so the hole is very big, it's going to be, this will be in focus, but this will be mildly out of focus, well very out of focus probably, depending if it's very low number, and then this stuff is almost a blur that you can't tell what it is. So if you want to singleize something in the shortest focal distance, then you use a lower number. Now, the way that I remember which way the numbers go and what the effect they're going to have is basically just this. I know it's going to seem silly, but if you remember this, you'll remember it. If you imagine that you get to somewhere and you just open your eyes and then you close them instantly, what information did you get? You got that thing that was in front of you, maybe some of the stuff that's on over here, but mostly just that one thing you were looking at. Now imagine having a peephole and looking around and you're like looking over there and you're looking over here and you're looking at everything in focus and you're getting all the details of all the background. So a quick which is a low number, gets you just the stuff that's in front of you, and a high number gives you more time to sneak around and look and pick up all the details. That's how I explain depth of field to you, because I don't really explain this to anyone else, but that's kind of the way that I remember to remember that high numbers give you wide depth of field and short numbers give you short depth of field. It's another easy way. The numbers low and high for depth of field do. Shut up. So those three settings, ISO, aperture and shutter speed, are the three things that you're going to play with most when it comes to taking pictures. These were basically the three things that you had when you had film cameras. But the ISO was chosen by the film that you used. You actually had like 100 ISO film, 200 ISO film. It's how quickly it exposed. So you have to play a balancing act between those three settings, depending on what you want to do. Now say for instance it is a really bright sunny day and I want to take pictures of someone jet skiing. And I want to get those really crisp, sharp images of them frozen in time with the water spray and all of that. Well, we're in good light conditions, so I want to try and keep as much detail as I can, so I'm going to keep the ISO at 100. I'm going to open up my aperture so I have a shorter depth of field, so I just get him focused and the background's blurred, so it'll give more drama to that one thing, and I'm going to want a fast shutter speed. Now, if I find that there isn't enough light for me to get a fast shutter speed, I'll try and lower the aperture. If I can't go any lower, because that gives you more light, if I can't go any lower, then you have to bump the ISO up. Say I'm doing the same thing as an overcast day and I still want to get those crisp images. Well, then you're going to need to bump the ISO up even more. You're going to have to make sure the aperture is as low as it can possibly go and possibly accept having a slightly slower shutter speed. But this is why you have to play with the conditions and why light is so important. Also, if you're holding the camera, you need a certain amount of shutter speed to account for your shaking. I personally would say anything over 200. No, I can manage down to 80ths of a second and still keep it crisp, but that's through holding techniques. Like I've learned, like to rest my elbows on me when I'm taking a picture, things like that. I get very still and then I press the button and I can go down to the lower speeds. But for just general, like click, click, 200ths of a second is like the bare minimum. Okay, so then say maybe I want to take a landscape shot and I want everything to be in focus. From the stuff that's quite close to the stuff that's miles and miles away. Well, then you're going to want to use a very high aperture number. That's going to reduce the hole, remember? Peeking through the hole. For that, you're going to then need a slower shutter speed. You can up the ISO, but you might find you reach a point where you're going to hit noise, so you don't want to go that high. And in this case, you just have to use a slower shutter speed and maybe use a tripod. Depending on the time of day, depending on the light conditions when you're doing it, you have to play with these things. Now say it was a sunny day and you wanted to take a picture of, I don't know, a dog splashing in the water and you didn't want it to be crisp and sharp, you wanted to sort of get the emotion of the movement and the splashing. Well, ISO really low because you've got good light. You want to put your aperture up really high so everything's in focus, and that's also going to bring down the amount of light available so you can bring the shutter speed down, and that means it won't get overexposed, because if you take a picture too quickly for the amount of light you're going to get underexposure, and if you take a picture too slowly in high amount of light you get overexposure. That's where overexposure, that's where you get the whites that just blow out and you can't bring any detail back from them. So if it goes super white or super black in the image, you can't bring detail back from those, which is why you want to try and stay in that grayer scale in the middle. One last example, if I was doing macro photography for instance, I want to use it in manual and I want as much detail as possible. So 100 ISO, I want to get at least 200ths of a second if I'm free holding. And if there isn't enough available light, because a lot of these lenses, you know, the macros, they cut out tons of light, and they also, because they're so close to something, very often they'll overshadow it. You want to use a flash. I'll get onto flashes later on, but this allows me to put in the extra light that I can't get, that isn't available. Generally though, I don't like to use flash in things because it looks very unnatural, but the techniques that I've come up with for macro photography mean that they don't look unnatural necessarily, and it really accentuates the detail. So as I say, low ISO, depending on how much of the insect I want in focus. If I choose a low one, I'll just get the head. If I want the whole body, I'll have to choose a higher one, and that means I need more light. But that you can, not only can you adjust the amount of light that the flash puts out, you can also move it closer or further away, or reflect it off of something. So I hope that kind of helps you understand what those three things are. As I say, sensitivity, the time that the picture's been taken and how much is going to be in focus and how much light is available for that picture to be taken. Once you get your head around those three things, you basically enter this land which is great, which is you start to, and I think this is a huge part of photography, actually being a photographer rather than someone with a camera, is that you start imagining a picture that you want and then you reproduce it. So you're not just taking a picture and going, oh, look, this came out nice. It's, I had this image in my head and I had to try reproducing it. And that's why you'll find so often people are super like, oh, I love my photography, it's amazing. Images cannot be that great because they're very, well, they're just surprised. They're surprising themselves, and to them it is great because they're just surprised they've managed to take this image that they consider to be that good. For me and for a lot of other photographers, we're always nitpicking and pointing out bits in our images, even our best images, that we're not entirely happy with. And it's that drive to try and reproduce the thing that's in your head that will make you a better photographer. And it's also, as I say, that's why when we get a picture that most people are like, that is amazing, how could you be unhappy with anything on that? And we can go, well, this bit and this bit and this bit, is because it isn't the thing that was in our head, but it was the closest we could get. I think that kind of sums up how photography should be approached. Okay, so the next is focus and focus points and focus settings and stuff like that. Basically, there are two main settings in a digital SLR when it comes to taking pictures. There's one shot, as it's known with Canon, which is you half press the button, like then you're not like a phone camera or anything like that, and it does the autofocus, and it will go bit, and it will focus, and as long as your finger is half held on that point, the focus will be at that range. So if you focus here, and you hold it and you go over here and take a picture over there, it's not going to be focused for over there, it's going to be focused for the distance you had before, so it remembers that focus point. Why do you want that? Well, that's for normal still stuff where you just take a picture of a sunset or something, you know, you want that, or even macro stuff. For most photography, that's the one you want, because you're just looking at something and you want to take a picture of it. It's only when it starts moving that you want the other one. I'll get into that in a second. What this does mean is you might notice some photographers, when they're taking a picture, will do things like they'll be going like this, and then they'll take the picture, and then they'll be like this, and they'll take the picture. It's because you're choosing the distance, a focal point from something else, and then having that over the thing you want to take the picture of. For instance, I don't know, say you were taking a picture, you know, 16:9, you had a person off-centered. The way you can do that is you can select focus points to focus on this side of the screen, which I'll get into in a minute, focus points. Or you can just choose the centralised one and just go, them there, then move them to the edge of the frame, then take the picture. And that way you've got the focus of them there, but with the blurriness of the distance, which makes them stand out but off-centered, and that's to do with composition. So focus points, basically in cameras, they have, when you look through the viewfinder, you have these little dots, and they are where the camera is going to find focus points. It's like, is that in focus? And it's going to try. This camera has 9, as I thought, which are spaced out nicely, and for most uses that's perfectly fine. I mean, I actually run all my cameras on central point, just one point in the middle, because then I can be like, I want that thing. Because if I'm taking a picture of a flower and there's an entire background, it's got one focus point on the flower and 8 on the background. And that's when you get that hunting thing in video cameras, when they're like, focus on this, no focus on that, no focus on this, no focus on that, and then you get this hunting, as it's called, as it's hunting for that focal point. If you're taking a picture of, you know, a painting or something, then using all of them is great, because it'll get it really quick. And we're like, focus. Or some street photography that can be good for too. If someone's particularly close, you can really get the fast focus and fire those shots off. I'd say for most of my stuff, because I do mostly wildlife, landscapes, stills, sunsets, that sort of stuff, I go with central points, because then I can choose my exposure and my focus point, because that's another thing. You can choose to have your exposure metering, whether you want it to be the whole picture, weighted towards the centre off. These are other settings that you can look into, but generally it's all centralised, so it's whatever you're looking at it's going to expose for, and it's what it's going to focus for, and then you can hold those settings by keeping that button on and then click. The other type of autofocus is the tracking type, and basically what this means is that the whole time your finger is half pressed, it's constantly going trying to focus on the thing that your focus points are on. Now, what you use that for would be something like this lens. Now, say for instance I'm taking a picture of a bird in flight. I want to focus on the bird, but it's moving away, it's coming closer, it's going backwards and forwards, and I want it in focus the whole time I'm taking my pictures. I can press and half hold it on the bird, keep my focus point centralised, and then I can track the bird, and the whole time it's going to, if it comes closer or further away, it's going to track that focus. It's not infallible, it isn't that quick necessarily, depending on what camera you have. The newer ones are amazing, and you can literally just, you can pan past and it's going to get the focus right the whole time. This, if I did a fast pan past, here will be in focus, and then by here it would be lagged and it would be getting confused. But this is also where more focus points is handy. This has got 45 focus points, which means I can have a centralised group. Rather than just one, I can have 3 in the same sort of area, which gives me more of a target to keep on that bird, to keep it in focus. So more focus points is important if you're doing action stuff, and the tracking speed of the autofocus and stuff is more important if you're doing action stuff, and flight shots of birds, and I think you get the sort of things that are going to require that. It basically gives you a larger target to try and keep on that bird, to keep it in focus, and rather than having to try and keep focus every now and then, it's doing it the whole time. Of course, the other option is manual, and that's when you just do it yourself and use your eye. But digital SLRs these days aren't set up for manual photography quite as easy as the old cameras were, because they had a semicircle, which you might recognise from old films where they show you through a camera. It's got like a circle with like a line in it. If you had a straight piece of wood and it was out of focus, that line would cause it to be like this, so it wouldn't be parallel, it would be like that. Then when it lines up like this, you know it's in focus. That's what they used to use for old film cameras, to definitely tell you sharp focus. So you have to go from your eye. Now if you're doing super zoomed stuff, macro, and it's all still and you can actually play with your camera, go into the the viewer settings and magnify. You can magnify by like 5 and then 10, and then you can really get the close focus right on the exact thing you want, then come back out and take your picture. So there's only 3 settings you have to worry about, and one of those is off most of the time anyway. And if you do what I do, which is use aperture priority, and tell the camera to be a couple of steps underexposed, it's almost like point and shoot. Because I am choosing the ISO, I am choosing the aperture, and it's just going to pick the shutter speed for me that's what's going to get the picture to the level of exposure that I've predetermined. And part of the reason, as I say, other than the fact that I can bring detail back from underexposing things, is it always gives me a slightly faster shutter speed, which is always advantageous, unless you need a slower one. So beyond that is composition and style and things like that. This is something that's the art side of photography, and what makes me, and you, and famous people, and well, when it comes to artistic photography, should we say, because you can go and take wartime pictures and stuff like that, and that's more about what's going on. You know, it doesn't matter about imperfections and lens flares and things like that. Lens flares, by the way, is when you get like light coming across your glass and you end up one of those green shapes. Green or orange or different colours, you can use those to your advantage. Like if you're taking like a sunset, sometimes it's nice to have that like real, you can tell how glaring the sun is. Or in other cases you really don't want that, in which case you use lens hoods and things. But obviously if you're doing something more mundane, like street photography, that's where real skill shines through, because you've got to make the image interesting, and the way that that is done is with composition, which is where you put things and how it goes. But what I mean by how it goes is, when you look at an image, you don't just look at the image, like, that's the image. You look at one part and then your eye starts to move around that image. A good photograph will have you, the photographer will tell you what he wants you to look at first, because that will be the first thing your eye will naturally look at. But then there'll be other things in the back distance, and you'll very often find that you'll look at this and then your eye will slowly flow around the image, and it's just, that's why a nice image seems like a rounded image, because you're looking at this and you look around the whole image and you sort of build up a feel of the whole image from that one thing. If you have a flow in it that's like, you notice this thing and you start to get over here, but something really is grabbing your attention down there, you're not going to get the same flow. It's going to be more like, oh, what's in this image? And it doesn't have the same look, same beauty, and that's what makes a good photograph. It's that flow. Unless you want that jar, in which case you can find a way to do that. As I say, this is more talking about the side that you learn. Get your camera. The basics I've taught you, you can go out there and start learning all this stuff. Also, don't follow the rules. Do not do what everyone thinks is the thing you should do. Try stuff that doesn't make any sense. Do weird things. Because that's how you develop a style, that's how you become unique. Now, taking abstract pictures of some rusted door handle that you've seen on a beach hut is the height of what I would call student photography, which is someone learning to do photography. They're starting to understand texture and depth and stuff. At that point, sometimes your images aren't that good, but it is a learning curve. And if you think, oh, you know, I've taken these images and I'm not that happy with them, they seem like student photography, try something different, try something they wouldn't, because that's one of the things that if you're taught to do photography by a school, by a university or something, or college or whatever, they're going to have a program which is all the way that the teacher wants it to be. It's like, this is how I see photography and this is how I'll teach it. Now, if you've got a very cool photography teacher, obviously they're going to want you to experiment and find your own place, but some think that this is the way it's done and you do it like this, and there's, you know, you could go into a book of checks and like, right, I'm taking a picture of this, this and this, and I have to do it this exact way. Nah. Do it however you want, find your style. For me, style, I have never really been able to put a finger on what I would call my style is. The thing I like to try and bring is a sense of, because I do insects and animals so much, it's a sense of what that animal is, a closer look, like to see the detail in its feathers, or particularly with the insect stuff, to see more than you could see with the naked eye, to see the details of the fact that the flies have got all those eyes and these little tiny horns and little hairs and stuff, and all the extra things, like you can see their breathing ports on the side, I can't remember what they're called, their breathing ports on their side and all that sort of stuff. You can't see that at normal eye, and that's why my wildlife channel that I had, that I ported the videos over onto this one, which was video work, by the way, was called Spicy's Hidden Worlds, because I really concentrated on the stuff that couldn't be seen. It was the hidden stuff, and I thought that's so interesting that you can, because, you know, if you've got a microscope and looked at this side right here, this exact thing, you probably find it fascinating as that piece of epoxy resin blends into the oil and the dirt on there, because you can't see it at that scale. But to just look at it, it's a dirty side. So a fly is a fly until you see it closer up. You might know before you start photography the exact thing you want to do. You might be like, I want to do astrophotography. That's great. Then what you can do is go and watch some videos. That's another thing. If you want to learn stuff, get the opinion of loads of different people. You're obviously doing it now because you're watching this video, but don't just take my word for it. Speak to other people, watch other people's videos, see their approach. The basics, the fundamentals, the stuff I've said in the beginning of this video, they don't change. That's science, that's physics, that's just the way that they are. Yeah, cameras are developing and different things are happening. There is what I would call the photography killer camera, but it's kind of offering a really unique perspective, which is a camera which has like 16 cameras, and because you take all these different things, it takes a little part from each image and you get super focused throughout the whole image and all this clarity. And you can also then completely change it. Like you can say, well, actually I want the background to be out of focus and I want this bit to be in focus, and it truly, rather than a fake photoshopped effect, which you can do and it stands out, you get this like being able to pick and choose. But that's as I say, that's not far off in the future. It's something that's currently being developed and people are playing with, and I think will have a bigger sign in photography eventually. But in a way I think it kills photography, because it literally then becomes point, click, then do all of the skill and all the work afterwards. So that's why I'm not telling you, like, this is how you compose something. I mean, yeah, okay, a portrait shot is here to here, generally. Portrait, that's a portrait. A landscape tends to be landscape. But you just play with all this stuff. One thing I would say, because of the way that the internet is now, is I actually take my images, or at least I crop them to 16:9, the aspect ratio of 16:9. What comes out of these cameras is a bit squarer than 16:9, so it's 9 high, 16 wide. What comes out of these cameras is a little bit taller. Now on my camera, I put it into a mode which doesn't take the pictures in 16:9, but it shows me on the display the lines for 16:9. So I have to imagine when I'm taking a picture, actually I want to cut these bits out. The reason I take pictures in 16:9 is if I stick them in a photo into a video, they look like this and not like this. So if you're going to do video, if you're going to do stills to video, unless you want to crop every single image to fit the frame, or you're going to change the aspect ratio of the video so you have overall black bars somewhere, 16:9. And I think most camera phones take in 16:9 now, because that's kind of the aspect ratio of the screen, because our pictures, our video that we have is 16:9. So phones, generally, if they've got thin bezels, are always going to be roughly a ratio of 16:9. Okay, so other accessories that I use. Flash gun. This is a standard Canon 430EX speed light. I had it for years. They're about 170 quid. They're not cheap. You can buy much cheaper ones from different companies these days, and they're actually really good. As I say, do not be necessarily that scared of some of the cheap Chinese photography stuff, because it's getting really good, but look at the reviews, because some is great, like this grip. But the first one of those I bought a couple of years, about a year or so before I bought this one, when I first got this camera, was shockingly bad. And I sent it straight back. And later on I saw another one pop up and I was like, let's give it a punt, and it arrived and I was like, this is perfect, this is really good. So yeah, flash gun, which just slots onto the top of the camera where the flash thing is. It's called a hot shoe. That's a powered point that connects to the camera, and it can communicate with the flash, and it actually does some focusing. Hold on, I'm trying to get this cable off. And it does actually control things inside the flash. It can focus where the flash is. Like when you change millimeter ranges on there, it will notice it on here, and you'll hear as it moves the lenses backwards and forwards to project that flash to that point, to be diffused at its best at that range. You also have these diffusion screens that pop down to help a little bit, but if you really want to diffuse stuff like I do for wildlife, actually for all photography, if you're doing portraits you want to diffuse it, ideally you want to use studio lighting where it's non-directed. Well, some of it's directed, some of it's not. And use soft boxes and stuff, but if you want to just for general photography of something in front of you, don't use a harsh straight flash. Get something like this, which is a little plastic attachable softbox, they're known as. I made one of these years ago before these were available. Well, I'm sure they were available, I couldn't find any cheap. I made one out of a plastic paint tub, some white muslin, some tin foil glue, some plastic in it to add some more diffusion, and you basically just shove that in the back of the paint pot, and And yeah, it worked. You can see that in a video I did called All My Camera Equipment or something, which is an explanation of all the camera equipment I've used up until now, which is years old. But it's got some of the stuff I used to use. But I actually found this, and it's compactable and it folds down flat and it's quite good. So flash, very helpful for macro photography, for pictures, weddings and stuff like that, because I don't really talk about wedding photography because I don't do human photography. I don't like doing it. But then again, you get different types of flashes. You get, like this for instance, say is a normal speed light, which you can move it around, you can have it reflect off the ceiling, you can have it reflect off of the side wall, you can have a reflector over here disc, so you get more of a fill from a different direction. If I'm doing macro photography, very often I'm doing it in daylight with enough light to just about expose the image, but with extra from the side to fill it in and crisp up the detail and give me that little bit more shutter speed. There's also ring lights, which have a light all the way around the end of the lens and offer you a shadowless view. You also get that look in your eye. I don't know if you noticed in some images they'll have like a model, and in her eye you'll see a round white circle. That's a ring light basically, and it just looks nice, but it also gives you a shadowless type of light. Extension cables. This is basically goes in the hot shoe at the top of the camera and lets me put my flash around the side, move it around wherever I want to do. Very handy. You can also do that with one of these, which is, this basically is either a remote trigger for my camera, in which case I put this on the camera and press this button and it clicks that, so it's like having a remote release. Equally, I can put this on the camera, put this on the flash, and now my flash is wireless and can be off somewhere in the distance. That can be quite handy if you're doing night photography and you want to light a wall, but then do everything else with the night photography type thing, or light a car or something where you can hide this behind it. It will go clink, and you're still going to do a long exposure, because this night photography obviously is a long exposure. It will go clink, and it will give you that instant fixed part, and then slowly the rest of the image builds up as the exposure comes. So that's how you get the one thing bright and sharp, but then everything else is like night photography. It's not Photoshop, it's just normally hidden flash. You can also use a torch for light painting and stuff, where you basically take it's completely dark out there, long exposure, low ISO is what I would do, and then you paint on the light and you can choose where you want the light to be. You can also run in and put shapes and stuff that people like doing. Memory cards, it's always good to get high capacity memory cards. Don't get massive capacity though. Don't get like, 256 gigabytes or something like that. I like using 32 gig at most. It's going to give you, a good few hundred images, but should anything go wrong, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. So multiple cards are good. It also means that if you run out of memory when you're out on a shoot, you're not going, oh, I have to delete that one to get this one. I missed the opportunity to get the best picture of a storm petrel that I could ever have got. I actually saw it in the camera. I took the picture. It was amazing. A storm petrel's a little bird. It does this thing where it hovers over the water and it tips its feet in the water. It was a full frame filling, wings up, floating, toes just touching on the water. Beautiful light. It was amazing. Probably one of the best pictures I've ever taken. Unfortunately, when it flicked up, it also had memory cards full in front of it, and then it disappeared forever, and you can't get it back. Because basically, when you take pictures, it goes into the buffer in the camera, which is like it's internal memory and what it's going to store. So it's the equivalent of trying to hand someone more plates than they can put in a cupboard at once. So if you go like, here's 5, and they're like, thank you, put it there, and then you come back here, 5, thank you, you do this. That's a buffer that's working well with its demand. If you've got a guy going like this, constantly giving him plates, and he can't hold them all, and then he drops them all. The buffer is basically how fast the plate putter in the cupboarder can do it. I know I explain things in stupidly overcomplicated or weird ways, but this is the way that I've managed to get information through to people in the way that they understand. Also, another option, and it will be the last thing I'll be talking about, other than one thing, I'll get to this in a second, tripods. You don't need to spend £1 million on a tripod, but do buy a good one, because the cheap ones, they don't do their job. They have to hold steady, they have to not shake, they have to have enough heft to them. I've used slick tripods, they were good, but most of my tripods are Manfrotto. Yes, they are expensive, more expensive than most, and you'll look at a Manfrotto tripod and be like, it's £150, or I can buy this one off of Amazon for 50 quid, or £30. As I say, you might get some good ones now. I haven't bought a tripod in years, because when you buy a decent tripod, and this is part of the reason why I buy Manfrotto, when you buy a tripod, a decent one, you don't buy another one. The one that this camera is currently sat on is a foldable one. You can lift the legs up and put it flat. I've actually shown it on video at some point. Hang on, I'll tell you what it is. It's a Manfrotto 190 Pro B with one of their pistol grip heads on it. The pistol grip heads are handy for moving stuff around, but general photography you don't need a pistol grip head. You want to get a standard head, ball head can be handy, but a 3D head's also great, so you can really diversify. A tripod which can go low, can go high, can, you know, you can put different heads on it and stuff. That's really handy, and that's why I would put the money into a decent tripod. Also because you're putting all this money of yours on top of a tripod. I see people that will put 1,500 quid balanced on top of a 30 quid tripod, and I'm just like, it's going to fall over. And I've been at like wildlife shoots where some rare animal birds turned up, and I've seen thousands of pounds of equipment deck it into the ground because people had expensive equipment and cheap tripods. Before I move on to this very last thing, which would be basically time lapses, because I know people are very much into time lapses, look after your equipment. Now I work my equipment, like there's paint coming off of this, I don't mind getting, I mean this is basically a fully waterproof camera, this one isn't, but they are made to take some form of abuse, but equally look after them. None of this stuff has been dropped ever, I don't think. Part of the reason for that is I'm just so damned careful with it. Neck strap, use one. If you ever give your camera to someone to hold, you put the neck strap over their neck and you tell them not to take it off. I hand it to them like this, and it's more of a caring, nice way to give it to them. Put that in their hands. Well, I'll put this over their head for them and the hand on the camera, and then it's in their hand and I can explain to them what to do, but it also means that I know it's round their neck, and if they go, it's cool. Neck straps. And it also just makes it easier to carry the camera around. To be honest with you, these Canon ones that come with the cameras, they're alright. They're not brilliant, they can pull a bit, but I like them for their durability. I have had other phone ones, but if you have more than one neck strap because you're carrying a lens or something that's quite heavy, it starts getting annoying having big fat ones. So I tend to just wear like a hoodie and have it behind that, because this will pull over time. Weight is something that comes into it, like this lens, this camera, I think that comes to about 3 or 4 kilos. So when that's together, hefting this thing around, a couple of hours, it starts to get to you. And if it is on your neck, it's going to start pulling you back and stuff like that. So the very, very last thing, because this video is long as hell, I don't know how many parts I've made it into, or whether I'm going to let it stream as one, but this is a remote control, just like this one, apart from it's wired, but you can put long extension cords on this. But what this actually is a timing unit. So if I want to do 1 minute exposures, I can tell it, it's programmable, I can tell it to do 1 minute exposures, I can tell it to do basically whatever I want. You put the camera in manual and you tell this to do it, and it's the equivalent of pressing and holding the button. In fact, half hold gets your autofocus, full hold takes a picture, and if you click it up and it locks in that place, it's now running a time lapse. That can be the same as bulb mode. When it comes to shutter speeds, you can say you go from high to low, and then you've got B, which is open as long as you keep it open. I should have mentioned that earlier, but it only really is relevant to night photography and astro stuff, but generally I try and pick my timings anyway. But I've done a few time lapses like this one. Now the way you do this with a stills camera, if you do it with a video camera, it's easy. You just film the entire time and then you put it in your program and you speed it up. However, it means it's only as good quality as the video, and it's difficult to change much in sort of like with raw images. I'm saying you can bring a lot of dark back. You can't do that with video so much. You can get a bit back, but it's more like trying to fix a JPEG. It's only got the information that's there, nothing extra in the background. And in programs like Lightroom, I would have, because I'll get onto that, Jesus, no, I do need to talk about that as well. When you bring it into an editing software, you can adjust those images, but you can adjust those images by the exact same amount for all of them. It's called batch processing. Say I've taken 200 images for a time lapse, which I'll explain how it's done in a second. I've actually got a video on it, and I just want to bring the darks up slightly. I can do that to one image, select all, do this to all of them, and it will be the same. The reason that will work, and this is the 2 key things to doing time-lapse stuff, which I do explain in the time-lapse video, but I'll include it here as a quick note. Manual focus must be on manual focus, because it's going to it's going to get a different focus point. Every time you try and focus it, you're going to get something different. So you focus the camera and you turn it on manual focus and you do not touch it. You also put it in manual. You choose the exposure settings for what you want. Now if you're going to be, for instance, taking a picture of a sunrise, it's going to start out dark and it's then going to go bright. So you're going to want to underexpose. So when the sun first comes up, it's a bit underexposed, but as it gets in the sky and it really brightens up, it's not going to wash out straight into overexposure. You're going to still keep the detail there. I think I've got examples I'll be showing up in the video if I can find them. Alternatively, if you're doing a sunset where it's going to go from bright to dark, you might want to overexpose to start with, and then allow it to run until it comes into, and then as the sun goes down, it's going to come into exposure, and then it's going to go below its exposure, and the sun disappears. So you need to decide which way the light's going to go, how you start out, because once you've started it, you don't touch it. Okay? You basically, with one of these, it's an interval timer, or your camera may have it, you say, I want you to take a picture every 10 seconds for 500 frames. And depending on how quickly you play that back, depends how many seconds of video you'll get out of it. So say you take a frame every minute for 60 minutes, that's going to give you 60 frames, taken over an hour. If you play that at 60 FPS, that's going to give you 1 second of video. If you play that back at 30 FPS, you're going to get 2 seconds of video. So you are doing very much a manual frame rate, depending on how you're going to play it back. One of the advantages of this, obviously, is that when you do, let's say you did, I don't know, a 5-hour time lapse, rather than having 5 hours worth of footage, which would be tons of gigabytes, if you do the intervals far enough apart, you may only need, you know, a couple of gigabytes worth of pictures. It also depends on what you're doing pictures of. If you want to get like a time lapse of people moving around the street, like hyperlapsing, you want to take pictures quite close together and then play those back a bit faster. So you're getting close to video speed, but it's jumping more because you're having those gaps. You don't want like split seconds between pictures, because then you're just getting into video. Because remember that all that video is taking pictures at 30 times a second or 60 times a second with your 30 or 60 FPS. But if you make it, say, 6 seconds, then you're getting a really slow shutter speed. But in the equivalent, when you play it back at 30 frames a second, you get that hyperlapse where you get them really jittering around and going places, and that works for, as I say, if there's movement. If there's movement, you're not going to want things to be far apart, because they're just going to go, for instance, if you're taking, if there's boats and they're moving in the water, if you take them close together, you're going to get the boat doing this, then going back this way, if it's floating around, for instance. If you do too long gaps, you get this. Boom, 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 backwards and forth, and it doesn't flow, and it's just really like jarring. It's really obvious that it's not a time lapse, it's just lots of images that are kind of similar put together. So one of these like interval timers, again this was like 15, 20 quid or something off of Amazon. It comes with different connectors with different cameras. It's very basic, but it does the job. If you want to do time lapses, and that opens up a whole, I mean, when I started doing time lapses, I was amazed how nice it was, because one of the advantages is, because I'm taking this with a camera which produces an image which is 5,000 pixels wide, over 5,000 pixels wide, it's technically 5K, because that's all 4K is 4,000 pixels across, to my understanding. And the absolute last, because I've been talking for so long about this, but I really hope this has helped some people, maybe inspire you to get into photography, because it's very rewarding, is editing software. With digital photography, you don't need editing software, you can learn to take the picture in the camera, but if you get editing software, you are going to be able to produce pictures way better. I honestly believe without editing software these days, just to tweak the raw images, you can't take as good an image straight out of the camera. I mean, you can try, and some cameras are great, but every image can be improved on with a little tiny tweak here and a little tiny tweak there. So editing software is really important. There are various ones out there to use. A lot of people get Photoshop because it's got basic, like Photoshop elements or something like that. That has got some of the basic tools in it, and it will have a raw processing type thing, but honestly, if you're going to really get into photography, just buy one piece of software. Get Adobe Lightroom. Buy it as a standalone piece of software. The Photoshop I currently use is quite a few years old. The Lightroom I use is up to date-ish, but it's basically all there. Before I got a more up-to-date version of my Photoshop that I use, I had like Photoshop from 8 years ago. It was like Elements 2, and it did everything I needed it to do. But yeah, if you're going to get a camera, I think just get Lightroom, invest in it, you'll love yourself for it, because not only will it give you a way of organising your pictures, and you can batch process them, it's absolutely required to do time-lapse stuff, because it's got the batch processing abilities, where you literally say, edit this image and then select everything, so you apply the same images that you did here to this. And have fun, because photography is fun. It's nice. It's a way of collecting memories that you can look back on. Sometimes photographs bring back bad memories, sometimes they bring back good memories, but photographs make a connection in your brain. I think sometimes, I want to say sometimes it seems stronger than video, because we remember our distant memories more like, instead of a video of what happened, every single detail, you know. You get snapshots, like when I remember being a kid, I remember like snapshots of like the house and the places and friends and things like that, and I don't remember it as like a video, I remember it as snapshots, and I think that's why photography connects us. It's like having a version of your own brain in your hand. And it's also a way of expressing yourself and sharing your point of view. As I say, whether I made this into parts or whether I made this into one long video, I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. I will try and do my best to answer them, and you might find some other people out there who might give you some answers. Don't worry about the whole like Nikon, Canon arguments. Get whatever you can afford, get what works. Look at lenses first, what's available third party like Sigma, before you buy the camera, because you know you could buy a camera and then be like, oh, I can't get any of the lenses that I want because they're not made by a third party and the company that makes my camera is super expensive. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel. If you feel like supporting this channel anyway, there are ways to do that. This channel is self-funded and audience funded basically, so if you want to help out, that would be great. Otherwise, get out there, get taking pictures and have fun. Catch you next time. If you enjoyed this video and the other content on the channel, please consider following the links in the description to show your support.